Thank you, Senator Cormann. Senator Di Natale.
Thank you. Thanks very much for the opportunity, Mr Gonski. And firstly, let me congratulate you on your appointment as Chairman of the Fund. I think you've made an enormous contribution to public life here in Australia. And I certainly would like to express my sincere congratulations for your new appointment. Your contribution on issues like education, philanthropy and so on are, I think, a testament to you, and you've done some great work in many areas. So once again, congratulations. It won't be a surprise to me that many of the questions that I'll be asking you today relate to the issue of the Future Fund's investment in tobacco. I was pleased and a little surprised to read on the 25th and 26th of October that Mr Burgess, the Managing Director of the Future Fund, announced the Governance Committee was considering the investment in cigarette manufacturers after a request from the board. And I suppose I wanted to just learn a little bit more about how that came about, and in fact a little more about the Governance Committee. Do I take that to mean the ESG Committee? Would that be correct?
Senator, if I might just mention, when I became chairman, coming from a world more involved with committees, I decided it was appropriate that we should have a network of committees which were focused on what they were set up for and could assist the board in coming to our conclusions. Each of these committees is drawn from board members, or guardians if you prefer to call them that. One of the committees we established was the Governance Committee. The Governance Committee was to look at matters such as the ones you're referring to. And it'll be an active committee, and its realm, its charter, which took the first meeting to establish, includes matters such as ESG and those to which you refer. Okay, so I'd perhaps like to ask you a little bit more about the committee. I must say it's a surprise because reading the publications from last week, the news reports, the statements from Mr Burgess indicate that the review has come up in the normal course of events, according to Mr Burgess, that I think another quote from the Australian where Mr Burgess indicates that we're always looking at the overall framework and policies that we've adopted, and then he goes on to outline the investment in companies that manufactured cluster bombs and divestment in that area. But what you're indicating to me is this is a new subcommittee, and in fact this isn't the normal course of events. Is that correct? Well, the first part is correct. It's a new subcommittee. The second part is that it is in the normal course of events. This is exactly what we set the committee up to do, and it is doing its job. Basically, we refer to that committee issues of ESG and other things, and the committee has only had, from memory, 3 meetings. It's had substantial things to do in the first one, i.e. set itself up. In the second one, it had other things to do, and its third one was quite appropriate. It looked at this matter in the ordinary course. Okay, great. Well, just a few questions about the committee. I mean, why wasn't there one established prior to your stewardship? Oh, you can't answer that question. Thank you. Okay, so why did you set this one up? As I said earlier, Senator, I'm used to these sort of frameworks. I come from a listed public company background. Over the last 10 years, most public companies have set up committees of the board, and I like to provide the opportunity for directors to be involved very much, and these committees are very useful for getting right to the nth degree of what's happening and advising the board accordingly. And so we've got a governance subcommittee. I take it from previous questioning, a conflict subcommittee. Correct. Other subcommittees? Yes, we have an audit committee, which you'd expect, yep, and which there was previously. We have a risk committee, and we have a remuneration and nominations committee. And they're all new? They are. Well, I put the structure together with the help, I might say, of our managing director, and I might say the board was very happy with it, indeed embraced it, and are taking it further. Good. But just the audit committee. I said it wasn't.
Obviously, as per previous evidence, the audit committee is not.
Yes, I would hope so. Good. So a little more about the governance subcommittee, which is responsible clearly for the recent announcement. Do you have terms of reference?
We've established a charter for each of the committees, and it has a charter.
Are you able to table the charter for each of those committees?
If I can't, it's only because I don't have it.
Take that on notice.
Good, thank you. And can I perhaps ask, clearly tobacco is a focus or one of the areas that the governance committee is looking at, I think it'd be fair to say, or are you looking at me quizzically? Is that a fair assumption?
No, well, we have announced, Senator, that we have as a board asked the governance committee specifically to look at tobacco manufacture and the various aspects as it affects the future fund.
Okay.
So I'm sure it won't be its only reference over the years, but that is the reference today.
At the moment. And that was my next question is, have any other references been made?
Well, other than its usual course of
Yes.
dealing with things, no other reference has been made.
Okay. And this is a standing committee?
This is a standing committee of the Board of Guardians.
Okay. How does it relate to the fund's ESG policy? Can you give me a bit of an indication? I know there's an ESG officer. We've had a discussion at previous estimates hearings. Can you tell me a little more about the relationship between the governance subcommittee and the work done by the ESG officer and the ESG framework?
Well, let me start, Senator, by saying the ESG policy that I inherited was a very good one that has been updated on a number of occasions and upon which a lot of thought has been given. The ESG officer is a capable and indeed, I find, a very good person. The governance committee was established for references such as this. If there is, by determination of the governance committee, some things to do, they will take it to the board. If the board determines that, it could change an ESG policy, and for that matter, if they referred to something else, it may change other things once the board makes that determination.
Okay, so I mean, we've got a situation where there's been an existing ESG framework and an existing ESG officer in place. The fund's been investing in tobacco for a number of years, since its inception, and yet it's been the establishment of the governance subcommittee and the referral to that's triggered a change, or at least a review. What does that say about the existing ESG framework if we haven't seen any change in or at least review of the existing investment in tobacco?
Senator, I don't think that it's for me to talk about what's happened to date. I can assure you, and no doubt you're aware of it, that the ESG policy was a good one. All I can say to you is since my coming, because of the background I have in governance and so on, I've introduced a procedure, and it is a fact that at the moment that governance committee has had referred to it the question of tobacco manufacture, in particular the investment in tobacco manufacturers.
Well, I suppose I have a slightly different view on the ESG framework, given that the approach has been, to this point, one of engagement rather than recommending exemptions. And I've asked on a number of occasions about the sort of benchmark that's required to demonstrate an improvement in the activity or behaviour of a particular industry for that engagement to be of value. And I've made a number of references specifically to tobacco. I mean, I don't need to, I'm sure, Mr Gonski, tell you about the wonderful record of the tobacco industry. We've got the fund, for example, investing in over $50 million worth of British American tobacco shares. They get their tobacco from Africa. We know there's a huge issue with child labour in Africa, particularly in the tobacco industry. We've got young kids who are abused if they don't turn up to work on time. They are very aggressively marketed at because of the practices of British American tobacco. We've got, I mean, there are a number of examples. The Indonesian company, tobacco company that makes those lovely sweet cigarettes with the sweet filters that young kids love so much. And we've got in Indonesia a situation where young kids start smoking from the age of 3 or 4, and most people who smoke in Indonesia took it up at under 10. What I've failed to see through this process is how does engagement with each of those companies that we invest in improve that sort of behaviour? And I'm quite happy to be proven wrong. I'm quite happy to have an example of where we've had some level of engagement with those individual holdings and seen a response, but I haven't seen any benchmarking done about the sort of improvement we'd like to see. And in fact, I've not seen one concrete example of improved behaviour within the industry.
Senator, let me firstly say, I do think that I should take just one step back, and you're probably aware, but forgive me for going over it. The Future Fund does not invest specifically in particular companies. I think you're aware of that. Under our legislation, we have to invest through managers. Our investment in tobacco comes from the fact that we have invested in a number of managers, some called active managers, other passive, but each of them has a mandate. And the mandate is usually something like investing in the 50 leaders or investing in indexes or whatever. And if a particular company, be it a tobacco company, is in that mandate, then they invest in that. So I just want to make it clear that that's the way the investments have been done. There's not been a specific emphasis on a particular company or whatever. In terms of the ESG, it's a very active policy that is and has been followed by the Future Fund. Where there are matters of governance or hurt or whatever that come through, we do have and have had a situation where the fund has either voted down things or changed the way companies have done it. But because of the relative remoteness of the investment through managers and through the fact that it's part of an index or a mandate, I just want you to know that it's not a specific investment. And I want to reassure you that there is now a reference to the Governance Committee, and I'm sure they'll look at all of these things.
Well, perhaps I'll talk about the specific example of divestment in cluster weapons. There is a precedent for divestment in that category of investment, and in fact, when Australia signed on to the Framework Convention on cluster weapons, there was divestment. So there's a precedent for us having done that. I'm still a little confused about why we can't use the same principles around tobacco as we have around cluster munitions.
Well, of course, cluster munitions predate me, but when I looked up to find out why that was done, it was to be consistent with the convention that had been signed. The question of whether the investment in tobacco manufacturing is consistent with conventions now will be looked at by the Governance Committee. It may well be in the past that it was felt that it wasn't consistent with that convention, but that's not for me to make judgments on the past.
Well, I mean, I'll point to you to the World Health Organization Convention on Tobacco Control, very clear guidelines in that about national investments in the tobacco industry, and we've signed on to that framework, and yet we continue to invest in tobacco. So I'd just point you in that direction.
Are you just referring him to it, Senator?
Yes,
because
I am.
I could.
Of course.
Because I think asking him, Mr. Gonski, for an opinion any further.
No, I'm simply referring him to that framework.
Sure.
That.
Well, he's
that
duly
currently
referred.
exists. Sorry?
He's duly referred.
Thank you. The other question I'd like to ask is, has the issue of tobacco and divestment of tobacco holdings ever been referred to the board?
By whom?
Well, by the ESG officer. Has concerns ever been raised at a board level?
Well, I can only speak, I must tell you.
Well, perhaps I might just ask Mr. Burgess that. Sorry to cut you off.
So the question is whether tobacco or...
Could you just state your name?
So, I'm sorry, Mark
please.
Burgess, Managing Director of the Future Fund Management Agency. In effect, all sectors are referred to the board on a regular basis when they look at the entire ESG policy. And the point that I've made in previous appearances is that it is an active policy that's reviewed on a regular basis. And this was my comments the other day, that as part of that review, there's a process to it to do it in a systematic way. It's a long-term fund, therefore you should consider it very strategically. So it's been reviewed. All industries get reviewed effectively when you look at the overall ESG policy. And in effect, that industry, but as I say, all other industries are also included in those reviews. And that's happened pretty regularly in my time, and I believe it's happened in the past on the same basis.
It seems a little curious that a new chairman and the establishment of a new governance subcommittee has resulted in action on this front, but I'll take your word that it's purely coincidence. Perhaps we'll ask a few other questions.
Was that the question?
No, I find that statement inconsistent with the clear fact that this is a referral under the stewardship of a new chairman. I've pursued this issue with estimates on a number of occasions, and the normal course of reviews have never resulted in this course of action. So I'm a little surprised that it suddenly the board has announced, or the fund has announced that it will review its holdings as part of the normal course of events. I'm just interested as to why this time's been chosen, if it's part of the normal course of events.
As I was saying, that the ESG policy gets reviewed regularly. We announced last week, because there was interest, and you've raised interest in it, and we thought it was appropriate just to say that this is what we're looking at next. But the ESG gets regularly reviewed by the board, and this is part of the process. And as Mr. Gonski said, there is a very firm framework now, and the development of the subcommittee allows further debate, discussion and research around that.
Senator, obviously you may have a different view, but I think that's consistent with the evidence that Mr. Burgess has previously given to this committee.
Sure. The question I'd just like to ask you, perhaps a few sort of personal reflections in your role as chairman, if that's appropriate. Chairperson, I should say. Absolutely. I stand corrected. Absolutely.
Well, you do better than some and have in the past on this.
Yes. No, I stand for. There will be many of my
I only say that
colleagues
because
will be
that's how he in fact described himself.
Oh, good. No, there will be many people who my own colleagues will be very disappointed.
Yes, I didn't want to actually put you in it. For that reason, I didn't want to get you in trouble.
Yes, well, you have
Sorry.
by pointing it out. So thank you. Can I ask you about your own view of tobacco holdings? You know, as chairperson, do you think the fund will be able to continue with its, I think, impressive rate of return and still manage to successfully divest itself of tobacco?
Senator, one thing I've learnt in terms of when you refer something to a committee is you do exactly what you've done. You don't say, I refer it and I want a particular result, nor do you say what you think or whatever. I promise you that this committee will look deeply into it. I'm a member of the committee. I'll put my point of view, as I'm sure the others will, and we will, as we have said, and this we will adhere to, we will publicise the result of our deliberations. But I think it'd be totally wrong, and I'm sure you wouldn't want me to do that, to actually be pre-deciding the thing, or indeed showing to you really my own views. I will discuss them with my colleagues in the proper and judicial way.
Well, I'd be quite happy for you to discuss your personal views. You're more than welcome to do so, but I accept that you may not want to.
Thank you.
You mentioned that the results or deliberations will be made public. Do we have a timeline for that?
We have not announced a timeline, but what we have done, Senator, is we've announced we're doing it.
Yes, good.
And the Future Fund is an excellent organisation, and when they set their mind to things, they do them.
And can I just ask you on the specifics of the result of those deliberations? There will be, once a decision is reached, that decision will be made public, and we'll be aware of it at the time the decision's reached?
The decision, that'll be the decision when it is given to the board, and the board obviously has to talk about it, and we will publicise it. We said that last Thursday at the time.
Good. Okay, that's good to know. Do you have any sense of how long those deliberations might take?
No, I think it would be wrong for me to say that, but I did say we're hard-working people.
So I suppose what I'm asking is, you know, are we talking weeks, months, a year?
I would definitely not like to commit the committee to that, but I am not. I'm aware of what the definition of filibuster is, and I'm not trying to do that.
Good. I'm pleased to hear it. A question about the perhaps level of concern there is among members of the public on this issue. Has the board been approached by members of the community, health groups, so on, about this specific issue?
The answer to that, Senator, is we have received some letters. I wouldn't say we've been inundated with letters, but we have received some letters.
And what about any expression of continuing support for the fund to continue with its current position of investing in tobacco?
I'm not aware that we've received any in that regard.
Okay. How do you balance that? I mean, is public opinion something that is part of the deliberations on an issue like this?
I think that what I'd say to you, Senator, is that this committee will look very deeply into it, and obviously they'll look at all aspects. I do also observe, as you'd know, because you've done a lot of things in your time, generally those who are happy with the situation don't write a lot.
I think that's fair enough. That's fair enough. The input that perhaps might be that you might consider. So will you be prepared to take submissions on this? Is this something that would be part of the normal course of events for the governance subcommittee?
Senator, we're not inviting submissions,
Yes.
but we are very aware that we are, part of Australia, and I assure you that anybody who has written to us, that we have a procedure, the letters are looked at, and we do reply to them.
Okay. Can I ask a few questions about, and I haven't asked this at previous estimates, but the fund management and the board are also responsible for how to invest the Health and Hospitals Fund. Is that correct?
That is correct.
Can you advise whether any of the assets in that fund, the health and hospital funds, are invested in tobacco?
I can do that, Senator. None are, because of the way that fund is invested. From memory, there are no securities whatsoever.
Oh, okay.
It's a cash.
Yes, I thought that might have been the case.
Security type.
Thank you. Do you have any? Well, I suppose I'll ask the question. I'm unlikely to get an answer, but of course, the government's done many good things in the area of plain packaging. Yes, and we've been very, very supportive. I mean, do you have any concerns about how your investment mandate may in fact undermine government policy in any area, not just tobacco?
Senator, I'm not sure that I can really answer that. I mean, it's for others to look at what we do. All I can tell you is that we believe we're good citizens, as I might say the fund has been since it was started, and we continue with ESG considerations and will continue to do so.
Good. Now, your previous or your predecessor wasn't particularly enthused about the notion of anthropogenic climate change and what needed to be done about it. Do you have a view on climate change?
That's not.
Why not?
Well, why is Mr. Gonski's view on these issues relevant to the hearings of this committee?
For the same reason it was relevant
No,
when
it wasn't.
David Murray was asked.
Mr. Murray expressed his personal views. He's entitled to express those personal views as a citizen. It's not a matter for an estimates committee.
I will.
I mean, Mr. Gonski may well want to answer it. I don't know. Maybe I've just cut him off, but I don't think it's. I don't think what people's views are on particular policy areas is not something I think the estimates committee really is focused on.
Well, I think as chairperson of a board.
Well, Senator, I'll just remind you that it's not relevant in relation to the supplementary budget estimates hearing. So I would, encourage you to move on with the limited time that we have available.
I did have a line, some.
Tell you what I think about it, but I think you probably know.
Sure.
Well, Minister, I appreciate that, but we have limited time, so I ask you to move on and keep your questions relevant to the hearing,
Sure.
Senator.
The process for divestment, if a decision's made, what is the process for divestment?
Senator, one of the parts of the decision will be what the process is. And that's one of the reasons we've actually had to take some time to look at it, because it is not a simple thing. As I explained, it's not just a matter of owning shares. We've got interests in funds that own the shares, and that committee, the governance committee, will look at all of that. And in terms of whatever decision we make, if it is a decision to divest, we will explain how long that will take and how we'll go about it.
Perhaps I might ask Mr Burgess, because this predates your time, but the fund divested itself of cluster munitions and investment in cluster munitions, so there's clearly a precedent there. What was the process? How did that happen? Can you talk me through how that decision was made? And secondly, the process for divesting itself of those holdings?
It's going to be an unsatisfactory answer, I'm afraid, because it's prior to my time as well.
Oh, okay, right.
We can probably take it on notice, Senator, and provide you with some information if you'd like.
I imagine many of the same challenges that will be confronted here, or might be confronted here, would also be confronted.
I think that's assuming a particular outcome, which so I'm not going to comment on that. Because, but if you are very keen for some more information about the way in which the cluster munitions decision was implemented, I'm sure Mr Burgess could take that on notice and provide that.
Sure.
Is that a yes, you do want it?
Yes, I do. Yes, thank you. I suppose the other question, just highlighting the difference between the decision around cluster munitions, which were responsible for about 4,000 casualties in 2010, compared to the 6 million that die from tobacco-related illness. Does that in any way alter the deliberations that may be occurring at the moment within the governance subcommittee? The scale of the issue involved?
Senator, I'm not going to prejudge what the governance committee is looking at, and I think it would be wrong for me to do so.
Okay. Look, I'm happy to end my questioning there. I'm not sure if Senator Ryan's got... No, Senator Ryan was considering. No?
Senator Coleman, care of those?
Well done. Thank
All
you.
done. Mr Gonski, thank you very much for making yourself available. Mr Burgess, Minister, officers of the department, I'd like to thank Hansard, the Secretariat and committees, and we stand adjourned.